support college students at your church. So let's hear Reverend Jesse.
In my home state of Texas, when a student drops out of high school, they're going to earn on average $5,000 less than a high school graduate. They're going to receive over $2,000 more in state aid, and they're going to have a higher rate of incarceration than a student who graduated. So when a Hispanic student graduates high school, we celebrate that. But then they go on to college and they face a whole nother slew of challenges, including a low completion rate, low graduation rate. So what can the church do about it? Should it do anything about it? Some people would say, you know, that's the college's responsibility, that's the parents' role, that's the student's responsibility, and that's absolutely true. All of those people play a role in the success of a college student. But you need to also understand that our churches not only have a role, but they have a mandate to be involved in the success of our college students. Jesus said that the greatest commandment included loving the Lord our God with all of our mind. But when we face helping college students as a church, we might feel overwhelmed. What could we possibly do to help them? Well, we can learn some things from Nehemiah. Nehemiah was also facing a system that was broken. He faced a community that was in need. His heart felt for them. And as we look at Nehemiah, we can learn some principles that our churches can gain about how we can minister to our college students. You know, the first thing that Nehemiah did to face that big challenge was that he realigned. He took all of the families and he put them alongside the fence, along with whatever resources that they had, and he realigned them. And one of the things that we in our churches can do is also realign to help our college students. First, we can realign our purposes. We must realize that God always intended for us to love the Lord our God with all of our mind. And so when we reassess and realign our purpose with God's purpose, then we begin to change the way that we think about our college students. Change the way that we think about how our church should be involved. And we recognize that it is a purpose of the church to help our students love the Lord our God with all of their mind. Not only do we need to realign our purpose, but once we do that, that's going to realign our practice. And the things that we actually do in our churches are going to change. And so we begin to look at college students as a mission field and a ministry field. Maybe you invite them over to dinner once a year for a meal. Maybe you get them involved in the ministries of the church. And as you begin to do that work, you need to understand that just like Nehemiah, we're going to face enemies. Nehemiah had enemies from the outside, people who came in and said, we're going to destroy the work that you've started to do. You're restoring the walls, but we're going to tear them down. And the education of our college students also has enemies. There are problems in the systems, there's financial issues, and I'm not saying there's a dropout demon out there, but think about this. Who else would want more to defeat our students and keep them from loving the Lord our God than the enemy, Satan himself? So there's a spiritual battle there too. But you know what? Sometimes the greatest enemies are not from the outside, they're from the inside. Nehemiah tells us that his fellow community members would come up to him, and it says that 10 times over they would tell him, we're not going to be able to do it, we're going to be defeated. And sometimes in our churches we have this defeatist mentality. We think, you know, we don't have the resources to minister to those college students, we don't have college graduates, we're not smart enough, we've got to send them over to the other big church across town. But we need to ask yourself, do you have the mentality of a Nehemiah or a naysayer? We need to begin to believe that our churches can minister effectively to these students and help them love the Lord their God. And when Nehemiah faced this challenge and he realigned his people, he came to them and he gave them this words. He said, after he looked things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, don't be afraid. So he reactivated their hearts. He told them, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of ministering to your college students. Don't be afraid of going on to the college campus. Don't be afraid about getting involved in their lives. God has not given us a spirit of fear. The scripture tells us that we shouldn't fear because Nehemiah told them, remember the Lord. So with our hearts, we're not afraid. With our minds, we remember the Lord. We can't just think well and have good hearts. Nehemiah said, fight for your brothers, fight for your sons, fight for your daughters, their wives, and their homes. We've got to get our hands involved. We've got to get our churches to work. So in our diverse Latino family, we know how to love the Lord our God with all of our hearts. In some churches, they worship with a tropical rhythm, and others with mariachis or contemporary worship. We're passionate about that. As we become passionate about ministering to our college students, we're going to discover the wonderful joy that it is to restore the educational walls in our community and allow everyone, even our college students, the joy and the blessing of loving the Lord their God with all of their heart. Your church and my church have an opportunity to be a part of that.